Issues are what Utah's dealing with, some other programs around the country. We'll talk about that, timetables and more with the editor-in-chief of the college football section of The Athletic, Stewart Mandel, who's kind enough to join us here on The Bill Riley Show. How are you, Stu?
Great, Bill. How are you?
Doing okay. I feel like, I don't know if you feel the same way. I've always been very optimistic, Stewart, but I'm feeling more and more and better about my optimism about an on-time start for college football. What about you?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, when COVID was first really hitting and we didn't really have a full grasp of it and just seemed to get worse by the day, March, April, maybe even into early May, I would say I'm optimistic, but it almost seemed like wishful thinking. But with each month, we get more used to what we're dealing with, and obviously none of us can predict what's going to happen from here in terms of how the virus spreads in our country. But the fact that players are already back on campus at a lot of places or will be soon, I mean, that's quite the departure from various points in this time period when I'd be asking the commissioner, talking to commissioners or ADs, and they'd be talking about what's the latest we can bring them back and not have to delay the season. Instead, as more and more states opened up and fitness centers and gyms started opening up, it became, okay, well, we think it would be safer to just get them back here where we can in a controlled environment. So they're there. The plan that I think will be approved here in the next couple of days for a 6-week training, kind of extended training camp. I think everybody's planning to start on time.
Yeah, and I saw that document kind of floating around the interwebs the other day. It kind of looks like a mid-July start is what we're looking at for that 6-week window to start that first weekend in September or week 0 the week before. I think I saw 29 days is what they're required to give you before your first game. Is that what you saw too?
Yeah, so 29 days is what you're usually given for your preseason practices. What's unique about this is there's a bit of a phased-in approach. I mean, they're trying to get guys back and get back into shape before they, go into to a regular training camp. So there's going to be a period. It looks like there's going to be a period starting in mid-July where they can spend 8 hours a week with the coaches and do meetings and installations and basically walkthroughs before you get to traditional training camp where you can put on the pads.
Yeah, it kind of feels like they're making up a little bit for a lot of programs lost spring and some of the off-season stuff that would have happened in May and June. They're going to give you those extra 2 weeks in July, right?
That's right. And obviously there's kids back now, but those are for voluntary workouts. And they actually are voluntary, as opposed to when we think of them as usually required voluntary workouts. I mean, they're not even, they can't even give them like a program to follow. I mean, it's just, they're basically just opening up the buildings so that kids can get their workouts in rather than they feel like that's safer than if they were back home going to 24-hour fitness or something like that.
Yeah, Utah's kids come back in-state Monday, out-of-state a week from Monday, the 22nd, and then the newcomers, the freshmen, the newcomers to athletics come in the last Monday in June. So they're kind of phasing it in, but based upon everything I've talked to and people I've talked to, I think most of those 18 to 22-year-old kids are probably anxious to get out of their parents' house and get back up and doing some working out.
Oh, for sure. I mean, we talked to some players a few weeks ago. We did an anonymous survey about returning to campus, and I was actually surprised at how many of them were able to do more formal training still when we were all at stay-at-home orders. It wasn't quite as amateurish as I thought it would be. But, they want to get back on campus where they have access to the best facilities. Now, we're trusting that the schools are taking all the necessary precautions. They're putting limits on how many players can be in the weight room at the same time, how much, people have to wear masks, all of those things. So, we are seeing the numbers start to trickle in about as the players come back, they get tested. And we've seen a lot of schools where anywhere from 3, 5, 7 players who didn't have any symptoms are testing positive for COVID upon returning. And so that's kind of the first test of procedures. And can you isolate them quickly enough so that doesn't turn into a full-on spread within your program? It
was always funny to me. There were a few people that were worried that schools weren't going to test the right way or do enough testing. But my always thought was most of these schools, especially Power 5 schools, have such resources. I would rather over than under test, because the last thing I would want, as you just mentioned, is a full breakout and anything that could set me. But we're already set back, not having spring and early summer. The last thing you want is another setback. So I would almost guess most of these places that have the resources to do it would rather go overboard than under test.
Yeah, I'm not too worried about Power 5 schools. They have the resources to do it. I have no idea how. I've seen there's been a wide range of numbers I've seen of what the tests cost or what they expect they'll cost by September, but I have no idea how the lower level group of 5 and certainly FCS schools are going to afford to do the amount of testing that you really need to do for it to be safe. So I'll be interested to hear about some of those plans. So
we're talking to Stewart Mandel of The Athletic here on the Bill Riley Show. I'm just curious, the next step I think most fans care about is, am I going to be able to go to the games? The SEC has been full SEC the whole way. We're expecting to have and hoping to have full stadiums. Other places have said, maybe nobody, and other places have said maybe. Do you think it'll be regional? What's your expectation for stadiums this fall across the country?
Yeah, I don't think that's something anybody can predict right now, and I think it'll be state by state. We already see now where some states are allowing mass gatherings of a certain amount. Certainly not anywhere near 80,000, but, and some still are, won't allow them at all. And by September, I assume you'll still see some pretty big variances. And it also may, I think people want there to be a set answer on whatever, August 1st, and that's what the plan's going to be for the whole season. Well, what if, you say, okay, you can do 25%, you can do 40%, whatever it is, and then in mid-October, early November, there's a big upswing in the number of cases in the community. I would think they would have to rein that back in. So we just don't know. Me personally, like I saw the New York Times the other day they surveyed 591 health professionals about which activities they would be most likely to go back to quickly. And literally the very last one on the list, the one they would be least likely to go back to, was sporting events. So, and these are the people whose whole careers are studying the risks of these things. So me personally, I can't imagine wanting to be back in even a quarter full stadium. But like you said, SEC schools and others are saying full speed ahead.
Yeah, we'll see what happens. Last Friday, news broke here regarding the Utah football program with defensive coordinator Morgan Scalley and a text that went public on social media from 7 years ago, in which he apparently used some racist language. Caught everybody here off guard. We'd known nothing about it. Was very out of character for the guy Morgan Scalley is. But it was, it was funny. People were saying to me, I can't believe that, this is going everywhere. I said, well, why can't you believe it? I said, Morgan Scalley is a prominent defensive coordinator, a rising star in coaching at a Power 5 program of note. Yeah, it's everywhere. What was your reaction when you saw the story, Stewart?
I was, like you, pretty shocked. And first of all, I think credit to our Utah beat writer, Chris Kamrani, who had a story that went up Monday where he talks to a lot of former Utah players about Morgan Scalley. And this is a pretty complex situation. This isn't really, I think people sometimes and certainly on social media want it to be very cut and dry. Like this person's a racist or they're not a racist. And, you see it in the responses from some of the players that there's more to it than that. It may be that he's a well-intentioned guy who has said some things out of ignorance or, I think in college football locker rooms and weight rooms everywhere, and we're starting to see some of this stuff get exposed, especially at Iowa. There's instances where, in the kind of the macho culture of football where you are trying to motivate guys, you say things that maybe 8 of the 10 guys you say that to would consider it no big deal, and 2 of them would be deeply offended. So I don't envy Utah and the investigators and looking into how they're going to handle this. There's going to be a lot of scrutiny, obviously, a lot of people. But, one thing that's clear, the events of this country over the last 2 weeks, and college football is not immune from it, behavior that got overlooked or maybe downplayed in the past is it's not going to be the case anymore. People, African-American players, former players feel empowered to speak up right now about instances where they felt like there was racist treatment. And I don't think that these couple instances that have been highlighted at certainly Utah, Iowa, one of the assistant at Clemson. I don't think it's isolated to that. I'm sure that stuff like this has happened other places as well, and it's just a matter of whether players who felt powerless when it was happening are going to feel more empowered to step up and expose that now.
Well, Chris was on with us the other day. Some of the guys he quoted in the article have come on as well, and it was a well-balanced piece. I thought it told a complex story. You're right. Social media in today's day and age, it's good or bad, it's black or white, it's racist, it's not racist, and everything for the most part is nuanced, and Twitter and social media and places don't account for nuance. I thought, and Stevenson Sylvester's former linebacker was in the program. He's works with us a little bit here. He's a friend. I've known him forever. He was quoted, and I thought his quote was the quote that stood out most to me in Chris's article. He said, I do believe Mr. Scally to have been a victim of his own comfortability and completely overstepped his boundaries that should have never been crossed. And I think that's what maybe, not just in this case or whatever, I think what we're finding in a lot of places today is people get a little too comfortable with things because it's always been that way, or they think because they might know somebody they can try to do something or say something, and that can cross a line. And I thought that was one of the better quotes out of that story Chris had. And as you said, it's going to be interesting to see what happens here. The outside firm will give its results back to the university, and then they'll make a decision.
In college football programs, college football coaching staff live, you're in a bubble. I mean, you talk about the practice bubble. I think the whole football facilities are a bubble. Sometimes these guys spend 12, 14 hours a day in there, and they're not interacting with anybody outside the program. And you're absolutely right. I think there's a false sense of complacency and comfort where, what you say in there is never going to be heard outside the building. And certainly coaches, there's just this power dynamic. And I certainly, if you've been following the situation in Iowa, it's just been unbelievable. Dozens and dozens of former players recounting similar experiences, and they all boil down to one thing. Kirk Ferentz, coach of 21 years, has more power than anybody in that state. And his strength coach, who's been with him since day one, was given complete and total autonomy to run things the way he wanted to. There was no accountability. There's nobody, they technically have bosses, but that's not their actual dynamic. And so they crossed boundaries because there was nobody holding them in check. And I would hope that lessons come out of these situations, although I've said this in the past, you never really see things change, is that you can't give the head, I don't care how respectful, Nick Saban, whoever, you can't give them complete and total power and have zero accountability. You can't create an environment where players who feel like they're mistreated don't feel like they can speak up because they might, have their scholarship taken away, or they're going to badmouth them to NFL scouts. There's got to be, just like in any workplace, a reasonable way for people to come forward and express their concerns.
No doubt about that. Has the Clemson thing been as big a deal as I don't know, maybe because I feel like Clemson is one of the 2 or 3 preeminent programs in the country. Maybe I don't feel like this story has, as I watch SportsCenter and other places, gotten some of the coverage maybe that I thought it would. Certainly college football people are talking about it, but I just feel like if you've got a coach at a program like that saying something, I didn't feel like maybe it got the run that I thought it would over the last couple of weeks.
I've seen some of the ESPN pundits take Dabo to task. It has, but more so about his whole response to the Black Lives Matter movement, where he was one of the last head coaches to speak out, and then people felt like his response was inadequate. In terms of this actual incident where one of his assistants used the N-word in practice, it feels to me like, Dabo, that's another situation. Talk about a guy who has total authority.
Right.
Obviously, Dabo Swinney does at Clemson. It's a small town. It's a small camp college in a small town where there's not even that many media that cover Clemson, which given how prominent they are, may come as a surprise. And I just don't think there's anybody telling him what he can and can't do. And he gave his explanation of what happened, and it sounds like they're going to leave it at that. There's people who think you got to fire him, or you got to reassign him, and how's he ever going to bring in recruits after they hear about this? But it just seems like Dabo gave his explanation, and they're going to move on. And you're right. I don't know that incident has really gotten made it onto the debate shows and that sort of thing. But I do think Dabo, who up until recently was a pretty universally, his favorability rating was pretty high. And I think in the last year or two, he's become a lot more polarizing to people. And certainly this whole time period has just given a lot of fodder for his critics.
Yeah, I think he's beloved within his program and within his fan base, but outside of it, I think you're right. I think some of the stuff on the national stage doesn't play as well outside of Clemson, South Carolina, as it does in the state.
I think that at first he was seen as a refreshing departure from the Sabans and other kind of hard-nosed football coaches. Here's a guy who likes to have fun and is a great personality and makes jokes. And then over time he said some things that have rubbed people the wrong way. I think the longer you keep winning, the more you're going to get torn down. But it just seems to me that he's become much more polarizing, just in the same way that pretty much any, Urban Meyer became a polarizing figure. Saban has always been a polarizing figure. Jim Harbaugh, like the more successful the coach is, the more, and this is especially true in college football, it becomes like you're either for them or against them. And I certainly think that's become true of Dabo in the last couple of years.
Moment or two more with Stewart Mandel. Great news this morning for Clay Helton. Apparently Reggie Bush is back at USC and is going to be carrying – oh, no, he's just – okay. If you looked at social media this morning, you would have thought Reggie Bush got another year of eligibility. He's back. He's back. He's back. Well, he's out of his exile. As we now have a little space from it, Stewart, was the NCAA – Did they go over the top in what they hit both Bush and in USC with for what happened?
I thought at the time that, first of all, the whole climate of college sports has changed so much since 2010. And in fact, I would say that those are some of the last days of the old dynamic where what the NCAA says goes, and we've got to rat out cheaters. We've got to rat out, any player that gets any sort of extra benefits. And Reggie was, as high profile as they come, and USC was at the peak of its dominance, and the dollar figures that were associated were very high. And so it was a very, villainized. He became a very villainized figure. And then Jerry Sandusky happened at Penn State, and I feel like it completely reset the bar of what we consider to be a scandal in college football or college athletics, to the point where literally, like this week, there's all these headlines about Zion Williamson and a lawsuit, and people claiming he took all this money, and nobody cares. If anything, people are like, well, of course he should. He's Zion Williamson. So, Reggie was one of the last people that really got caught up in what I would consider to be an outdated era of how people view college athletes and money. Not that that's universal, but certainly public sentiment over the years has gone more and more that way. And as I look back now, I think that the NCAA committee on infractions wanted to make an example out of him and out of USC, and just leveled these extremely heavy sanctions that if you were looking at that same case today, I don't think that would be the case. But, I say this about Reggie, despite all that, he is such a revered figure still at USC. And even, my colleague Bruce Feldman works with him at Fox and goes and does the games, and like wherever they would go, like the Oklahoma-Texas game, like there is no former player that is more revered by the current players and the fans than him. He's a legend. And I think it's great that, I can't believe it took 10 years, but that he's going to be finally officially welcomed back there.
Well, it's what it goes to show. Fans don't care. They remember the touchdowns and the Heisman Trophy and the national championships that they brought him. So the fans love him. But what's interesting about Reggie is the current crop of players and the guys that are playing now, they were younger kids, but they remember Reggie Bush. They remember him in the highlights. They may have been 5 or 6 or 7 years old, but they remember who Reggie Bush was. It's probably one of the first player these kids that have played over the last 3 or 4 years and currently probably remembered it. And I've got to say, Stewart, I'm an old guy who's covered college football a long time. Reggie Bush is one of the most electric players, if not the most I've ever seen.
Yeah, people are circulating the highlights again today, kind of in commemoration of this, and you look back and you watch it, and it's unbelievable. That's not to say that there haven't been recent players. Christian McCaffrey, to me, was every bit as exciting. It's just that he played for Stanford and not USC, and he wasn't on a program that was, just if you remember those days, USC was like there was no NFL team in LA at that time, and they were treated like a pro team. They were that big a deal. So it was kind of a unique period in time. But yes, he has. It's almost like his the aura around him has only grown more and more over the years, and now he's on TV, and I assume he'll become pretty involved with USC, much like Matt Leinart has been over the years. So, like you said, it is true that if you aren't following this closely, it might seem like why are they making such a big deal of just like an end of a disassociation? But for USC fans who have always felt like they were unfairly treated by the NCAA, it's a really big moment.
What are we going to do without media days in the next month?
I just saw that the SEC is going virtual, which was, I think, the last holdout there. And I got to say, I hate the circumstances that caused it, but I will definitely be fine with sitting in front of my computer watching those things on Zoom for 4 days than sitting in that ballroom with 800 people. It probably won't feel the same, obviously. Yeah. But media days to me have always symbolized like, okay, the season is almost here, where coaches and players are talking about it. And I hope it still has that same feel this year, even though obviously much different circumstances.
Hey, good catching up with you. Continue the great work up at The Athletic. I know people in this market love the work that both you do and Chris does. So thanks for coming on. We'll talk to you soon.
All right. Thanks, Bill.